get bangs again.
You actually look like I feel. Like I just got back from Amsterdam 15 hours ago, so I'm like pretty fucking high still. Uh
Yeah,
and and maybe traveling through time. I have no idea. I could be here, I could be there, I could be anywhere. It's all a haze. It's all a
I've
dirty.
got terrible lighting, so yeah, there you go. And terrible skin. So you put the two together.
And I don't actually have bangs, so there you have it.
I've got a cat in my hand, so finally.
You do.
Hey,
A
welcome
cat
to
in the
Too Much
hand is
Review.
worth two in the
Don't
bucket
say
for
it.
now. Let's start
Don't
it.
say
Not
it.
saying it.
Don't say it. Welcome to 2 Month Review, the weekly podcast brought to you by Open Letter at the University of Rochester. We take a book, break it down, talk about it, have fun, make jokes. We are talking about, in this season, The Confidence Man by Herman Melville. Go back in time if you want to listen to those episodes. And Melville by Rodrigo Fresán. Today, specifically, we go up to page 245. I am Chad Post from Open Letter Books, joined as always by Brian Wood, author of Joytime Killbox. How you doing, Brian?
Very well. I'm among the living, so I'm feeling good.
We're all on the same continent this time. And Kaija Straumanis, editor at Open Letter Books and translator from the Latvian. How are you doing today, Kaija?
Hello, I'm upright.
Yeah, you you're doing pretty well.
That's all I've got.
Doing pretty well. So
Yeah,
you
I think
guys think
I'm past my jet lag.
you're past your jet lag?
I think so, maybe. I don't know.
Solid, solid. So what did you get? I don't even know where to start with this. I've got nothing. I've got nothing going into here. But how did you guys like this section of Melville? Just to go right to the book. We usually banter, but I don't have any banter. Been traveling, as you know. Last week we recorded from Latvia. We're back in Kai and I are back in Minnesota or in Wisconsin right now. I was in Amsterdam for a few days with my daughter. That was fun. That was a good time. Uh, I did
Did
smoke a
you
lot
try
of
the
weed.
AK? Did you find the AK-47 and try it or no?
So what we did was we would go into numerous coffee shops and just buy a pre-rolled joint of like
Sure.
pure non-tobacco laced sativa or indica, but usually sativa. And that didn't have time or that didn't have like a name to it generally.
Gotcha. Okay.
And also, like, I do have to say, like, I shit on Amsterdam's coffee shop culture for 1 second here. So great that you can just go into places and smoke weed and have a coffee. That's awesome. I'm all for that. However, like, it is a really un, it's like a very uninspired version of like what that could be. Like in America, we have like, I know craft brewing is like the beta boy cuck of beer, and I'm there for that. I'm there for that, making fun of it. I'm there for the whole thing of it. And making fun of like craft weed is also very easy, like fish in a barrel sort of shooting.
Hmm.
But but at the same time, when you go into a place and they have like multiple listings and you're like, what's the difference between these? And they're like, that one's stronger. Like that's not really like you have no curation, you have no knowledge. And then like the places themselves are literally just like you go in and sit down and drink a coffee. Like there's no like community. It's not very like it's not like a bar like where you're watching a thing and talking to people. There's just people just sitting there. And there was one point where I got up and I was like half stumbled to the bathroom because like their stairwells are like, about this wide, like 4 inches wide and straight downstairs. And I was like, do these people think I'm high? And I was like, do they know I'm high? Like, are they aware? And realize that everyone's just there high, not speaking to each other. Like, it's a really unfriendly atmosphere for something that should be very, very, very opening and warm. So that's my take.
Yeah,
As
we
an
need more
introvert,
American in
community.
Amsterdam.
that sounds dreamy. I just wanna smoke my doobie and be left alone.
Why isn't
All right,
anyone
so
asking me about the Kimberly?
I have a Melville question for both of you. Have you seen the these fantastically mediocre Ron Howard film? I think it's called In the Heart of the Sea.
I'm not. You mentioned this, but I'm not.
You have not. Okay.
I'm not.
I thought it was about
So,
that. I thought it was about Patrick O'Brien's books.
oh, okay.
Honestly, like no joke.
Yeah. So, I don't know if I have the right title, but the gist of it is it opens with Herman Melville shows up in some ex-whaling town, knocks on a door, and he's going to interview the lone survivor that's still alive of the ship Essex, which the Pequod's based off of. All right, so he's gonna interview him, and the guy has like PTSD before there's such thing as PTSD because the ship sank and uh, they had like become cannibals to survive, and it was a pretty nasty affair. Um, but anyways, the guy says he's like kind of disappointed that Hawthorne wasn't there. And he's like, yeah, sorry, you just got me instead. And it's like, oh, yes, Hawthorne's a great writer. And he's like, yes, indeed he is. And like, maybe one day I'd be a great writer. Did you know of Melville's friendship and connection with Hawthorne? Was that something that was on your radar at all?
You teed up the segue so well. Like that's brilliant. That's absolutely brilliant.
Because
Yeah,
I was ignorant for the most part of it. Like I knew they knew like they're around the same time. I know they're contemporaries. I knew they lived near each other, but
sort of. Yeah, they live
yeah.
near each other, but in terms of contemporaries, it's interesting because Hawthorne's 15 years older, 14, 15 years older,
Mhm.
which I think back in like the early 1800s, that's essentially like being middle-aged, right? Like
Yeah.
it'd be like me being friends with a 16-year-old. Like it's just a crazy time difference when you live to be 42.
It's
Um,
fine if you do westerns that have a lot of killing in
Also,
them.
if you're P. Diddy, don't matter. Like it's fine.
Can you
Um,
imagine Cormac McCarthy at a P. Diddy party?
just a little giddy up.
Oh God.
Did he please? So they were friends, but I think that in some ways, like it seems like from what I've read, and I don't know a ton, but I have two stories and a quote. One is that the main gist that I've found is that they were close. They were close to each other. They were both writing, as you say, they're contemporaries of each other. Hawthorne was already pretty established, in contrast to Melville. But Hawthorne really liked Melville's writing and liked Moby-Dick and thought that he was like an impressive and important writer. Melville really liked Hawthorne. And I think in some sense, like the accounts that I've read, and I'm certain that in like the Melville biographies, which I have not read, there's a lot more information about this. So I may be totally wrong, but my general like top level gist is that Melville thought Hawthorne was like the fucking best and was like super cool. He lived nearby. He also like was like a also a very serious writer at a time when like there's a lot of like romances and adventure stories and whatnot, but not a lot of like that internal
You think
craft.
of like Last Mohicans, Deerslayer, like just shit.
Well, yeah, and it
And,
doesn't even have
and
to be shit, but it's just like a different impulse or
no,
different.
but like
Yeah.
how things have changed because now, of course, it's all good literature. There isn't any just you know shit for shit.
No, there's no shit anymore. It's just pure, just raw dog and literature. Um, but
But
yeah,
it does seem like again, I'm not a Melville biographer, but it does seem from the little I've read, like it's almost like there's a before he met Hawthorne, after he met Hawthorne style to his writing and like
Hmm.
purpose to his writing.
that part I don't know. But what I do is like he did
Because like the earlier stuff, it feels like uh it's very horizontal. Like, here's an adventure, let's go on a boat. Woo! Like, and that's gonna be the more popular stuff. Um, and then when you start kind of getting more vertical and there's more depth and layering and like questioning of like what's on the other side, human existence, evil, these things are just like I don't know, to use a Mormon term, just soaked into Moby-Dick, for for instance. You're welcome. Uh, but you know what I mean? Like, and then when you think of like Confidence Man, and like you can really tell a difference from like kind of like those more earlier adventure type stuff, and then
well,
when it starts to get a little bit more, I don't know,
he
like
dedicated Moby Dick
Hmm.
to Nathaniel Hawthorne.
yeah,
So
Oh,
they
really?
were friends then. Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. It's dedicated to him, to Nat H, I believe. And that's referenced in here too.
Because what I think knits with this section, what like knits it all together is like there's that like we get this voice of like, yeah, I was a writer, but it was like I'm just kind of writing about things, or like it wasn't like I want something a little more purposeful or more important, right?
But that's interesting that you tie that to Hawthorne too, because in here, like when he talks about that, what I was seeing was that that's the one where he's pointing to the Nico C and his dad as being like everything then changed. Like I was very popular. Like I wasn't a bad writer. I was a good writer. People liked me. My book sold, and then I did this crazy thing.
And you
Um,
became unpopular and
and I became
unreadable.
very unpopular.
Yeah.
And one of the reasons that's pointed to as to why like the reviews were so harsh in that book is that because of the scene where they oh my God, what are the names of the characters? I've lost my brain. I literally jet lagged.
And
Um
which in what?
in Moby-Dick.
Queequeg?
Yes, Queequeg, and then who's the narrator?
Ishmael?
Ishmael. And how did I not remember that? I was like, Ahab, Ahab, Ahab. And I was like, that's definitely not right. When they sleep
You're kind of
together in
more of an
bed,
Ahab, so that makes sense.
I've been on some White Widow here strain for a while.
I'm more of a Pip the cabin boy, I think, but whatever.
I've got a peg leg and I chase whales. But when they sleep together naked and it's not and it's like acceptable, that there was like an anti that strain of review too, specifically. So
Mm.
like the book does have some like homoerotic aspects to it. And the thing about the Hawthorne Melville relationship is that Melville was like extra in terms of everything and does have like a
He was
very strong
thirsty.
homoerotic.
He had a thirst for life, and Hawthorne was dry.
And that's okay. So I have a quote for you. This is so Hawthorne wrote like this long letter. I was gonna say email, which would have been funny, which would attract like I it's not like I haven't written text like this. So I understand the mode of being. Um
Melville would have a TikTok. Hawthorne would have a LinkedIn. That's kind of
yeah,
the
Hawthorne's
okay.
super
I got you.
LinkedIn. So Melville writes a letter to Hawthorne about how much he likes him, right? And how awesome he is. And he says things like, "My dear Hawthorne, the atmospheric skepticism steal into me now and make me doubtful of my sanity in writing you thus. But believe me, I am not mad, most noble Festus. The truth is ever coherent. And when the big hearts strike together, the concussion is a little stunning." And then he says in a PS, "I can't stop yet. If the world was entirely up of magicians, I'll tell you what I should do. I should have a paper mill established at one end of the house, and so have an endless ribbon of foolscap rolling across my desk, and upon that endless ribbon I should write 1,000, 1,000,000, 1,000,000,000 thoughts, all under the form of a letter to you. The divine magnet is in you, and my magnet responds. Which is the biggest? A foolish question. They are one." And Hawthorne's like, "I'm good." Like he's like, "Pass." And like we do have like Hawthorne is stereotypically like so puritanical, even though his writings are like so anti-puritanical, he's so
Yeah,
like
yeah.
conveyed and writes as such a like, stuffy,
The fuddy
super
duddy.
He just writes back unsubscribe.
thumbs down.
But no, it's such an
Shrug.
interesting.
Shrug.
So like, here's the weird thing, and it also ties in really well with this section. Like, so when I started kind of like looking into this and reading up on it more, um, so I think he's like in the Boston area or something.
They're
Yeah,
like south of there, like in
he's
the
gonna have a
Hamptons.
kid, and he's not doing any writing. So he's a writer who's not writing, and he gets a like obviously he knows the Bible really well. It's like like the Dutch Puritan upbringing. He knows in particular the Old Testament for sure. So like clearly, like you see the Jonah stuff, all the Job stuff, and then like obviously Ishmael is like the discarded son, and then Ahab is the most wicked king Israel ever had. So like,
Mhm.
oh, cool, like got it. Um, but as he was not writing, he bought a volume of Shakespeare's plays and got really into Shakespeare,
Yeah.
and then Hawthorne. And then so there's that review that he wrote for Hawthorne, and he starts mentioning like Hawthorne is like our Shakespeare, and then
Hmm.
there's correspondence that they have between the two of them, where it's like it's kind of weird to think because Shakespeare's only a couple hundred years old at that point for them, and he's like, we can have that right here, right now with us.
Yeah.
And like, what kind of preposterous thing? Think of how preposterous it is for him to be thinking, like, why don't we have something like this here? And it could be us. And
Yeah.
within those circles, so it is them. Like, Hawthorne, like, yeah, we're gonna be reading him hundreds of years from now. Moby-Dick, we'll be reading it 1,000 years from yeah, you did it. You kind of check that box. And then like shortly after him, like 1855, is Leaves of Grass.
Yeah.
Yeah, we were living in New York City, like like I don't know if they ever saw each other, but like they were in the same circles there. It's like,
Well,
well,
I think he
that's a
does.
weird prophecy that actually did a preposterous thing that actually did come true.
That's true. Like there's quotes from that review and letter in the article I'm looking at too. Um,
What was
in
it
which he
called?
says,
The Mosses or the what was he reviewing? It was something
oh,
Mosses.
that's what I'm trying to
Uh,
find, the story collection.
I got it here. Hold on.
Moss is from an old manse in a literary world.
Yeah.
And Melville reviewed it as, quote, a Virginian spending July in Vermont, both of which were lies. Um, or both geographical references in there are lies. But it's a long review, and he says, like, in this world of lies, after comparing Hawthorne to Shakespeare, writes, in this world of lies, truth is forced to fly like a sacred white doe in the woodlands, and only by cunning glimpses will she reveal herself, as in Shakespeare and other masters of the great art of telling the truth, even though it be covertly and by snatches. And that begins, I think, their relationship starts off of that review, which is also kind of cool. Like what you're saying, like for someone to be like, not only am I reviewing this book of this person I really like, but they're like the greatest writer. And Hawthorne, like I do like Hawthorne. I read The House of Seven Gables not that long ago, like I don't know, a couple summers ago, when first for whatever reason. And it's really interesting because he is very like dark about human nature. Like he doesn't believe good things
Yeah.
about humanity. And that's
Mhm.
kind of like the anti-puritanical sentiment and like fits in with Confidence Man. And at the same time, and also like Hawthorne's grandfather, I forget what it would be, probably grandfather, was one of the Salem witch trial judges who
Oh no
didn't
shit.
repent and said like, no, those were fucking witches. Like, no doubt. So
Shit.
he has like a lot of like weird guilt that comes through in his books, but like
Mhm.
they are also like fucking boring, like fucking tedious to read. Like writing from that era is wonderful in certain ways, but also fucking tedious. Like I don't want to deny that or pretend like it's other than that. I struggled my way through it. I read it. I was just like consistently like, okay, I can do like 10 pages of this and then I'm like, I'm good for now. No offense to Hawthorne fans out there. I don't diss him. It's just not always my thing. I need some speed.
Do you think if his
Too much
grandfather or great
speed.
grandfather had not have been part of the Salem witch trials, he would have ended up more in like a Mary Shelley camp of things, doing some pretty raunchy sci-fi
I don't.
fantasy
Yeah,
fiction,
yeah, right. He's doing like what would have been
doing witch
fanfic at
witch
that time,
porn.
like Dracula fanfic.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
Right?
But it's
He's
interesting, like
Twilight.
like how
Those are the seven
different the
Twilights.
personalities are, but the impression that Hawthorne has on Melville.
That's the part that I don't know that I can speak to because like in terms of their actual styles, I see them as quite different. Even though they're both of like that period, that like House of Seven Gables is so stringent and so like
Mhm.
so restrained and so like specifically like
Well,
uh
they talk about the same thing in different ways.
yeah, and whereas
It's the
Melville
same
seems much more
subject
like
matter. It's the same like dark humanity. Like it's the priest that's the bad person. It's not Hester. Like you know what I mean? Like uh it's it's all the whites on the boat that
yeah,
are the evil monsters. It's not the quote savages that are on
yeah.
like they're all the beautiful ones. Like they talk about the same things, just doing it a different way. But but there's like a madness to Melville that Hawthorne doesn't have. Like he's like further away.
He's so further away.
Yeah, yeah,
So
yeah.
much more rigid. I was thinking of Moby-Dick and like the songs. Like a chapter will just be a song or like people speaking on the boat, like the workers, like what they're singing at night and walking around talking. Like that sort of like out of nowhere, like individual character vocalisms. That's not a Hawthorne. Hawthorne has like
No,
complete control at all
yeah,
times.
yeah.
And Moby Dick has like a sense of like it being from
Or
somewhere
like
else.
the play within like Hawthorne's not gonna have a play within a song and like a captain come out and there's like yeah, there's like a postmodern madness to
To Moby Dick.
Melville's world. Yeah, I don't know if it's
I
from
just have to tell you
Scurvy
guys,
or. or
I
It's
what?
just
from
got
the
a
story.
I just got a
Eat.
voicemail message that says Aiden had an unexcused absence today, 1 through 36 and 10 goodbye. Which I feel like is like the greatest like AI rendering of a voice message ever. 1 through 36 and 10 goodbye.
Huh.
Great phrase. Sorry, didn't mean to disrupt our conversation about the Melville thing, but it is madness.
Yeah, yeah. Hmm.
Which one of the lines, it's not my favorite line of the week, but on 207, the very last line of the first paragraph, and then it starts talking about Moby Dick and all that, but there's that P.S. I am not mad.
Yeah, that's funny.
So
Oh, so
also to get in the book, like another one that works really well. So you were talking about that review. One of the quotes that I like from the review is like, I'll paraphrase it, but it's like I'm not oscillating on my opinion of Hawthorne. I do not oscillate. He is the genius of of our time, basically. Like he's like, okay, we get it. You like him. Uh, and then and then on page 197, in the middle here, it goes, whereas others opted to point out that its genesis arose from my apocalyptic need to impress and feel myself on a level with my beloved Nat H, admired by everyone else as Nathaniel Hawthorne, who added that W to his surname, and accused me of a longing to either be first among the bookmaking tribe or be nowhere, and of having been a victim of a morbid self-esteem coupled with a most unbounded love of notoriety with inflated sentiment and, quote, an insinuating, that's a hard word, licentiousness.
Licentiousness.
Yeah.
So were they okay? So everything that you guys had talked about from the letters and the outside information, was this an unrequited friendship? Was Hawthorne like in real life? Did they actually were they buddies, or was
yeah,
Melville just like effusive
Melville
and
would
Hawthorne like
no,
you're too much?
no, they visited, they were close. Like
Okay.
they lived close enough. Like I think Hawthorne's at Brook Farm at that time, which is like one of those quasi utopian
They were in
cult
the
communities.
Berkshires and like they were like picnicking together
Yeah,
and
Okay.
yeah, like
yeah,
They're just
they're
kind of like
there. Like
like
Melville
a
comes over a
literary.
lot, a
They're
lot.
just kind of like a literary yin yang then. Like Melville's super effusive and Hawthorne is very like
but
succinct.
I get
And then at
this
some
sense
point
that
it
like
stopped.
Melville started kind of rubbing on him the wrong way, like would made him cool off with their friendship, where it's kind of like,
I
dude,
think
relax.
I think
Yeah.
Melville went. My guess is that Melville put his hand in an inappropriate place at one point.
Yeah,
Just like he crossed a border, and Hawthorne was like, "I'm not ready for this," and like that was that.
I'm not ready for this.
I'm not ready to go on a boat with you, so
Yeah, I'm not. I mean, this sounds
I'm a
specific,
land.
whatever, but like
But Hawthorne is a land man, and I think in some ways, like,
drilling oil.
but in some ways, don't you think like Melville kind of misses the sea? I think maybe he felt most at home. Like it's that idea we have in this book with like water and ice, and this section starts with this quote from Under the Volcano. I
Oh,
have
right.
no house, only a shadow. But whenever you are in need of a shadow, my shadow is yours.
Hmm.
So I don't know. I maybe that was shadowing my reading of this, especially the parts where it's talking about um, Hawthorne, but it kind of made me think about that.
Yeah,
And so
that's really interesting. I mean, yeah, yeah. And what do you, so I have a question related to that then, is that with both of their influences, so Hawthorne's influence on Melville, Hawthorne's influence on American fiction writ large, Melville's influence on American fiction, which is like maybe moderated because Moby Dick is Moby Dick and people do respect it, but I don't think a lot of people have read it. I think a lot of people we
it's a
know.
classic, so you don't have to read it.
Yeah, but it's like one of those things that like do kids these days have they read Moby Dick? Like
No.
25-year-olds? Probably not, right? But you
Well,
know
the
what it is?
comic book was popular at one point, right?
The comic book?
Yeah, I no, like legit. I think the comic was
Really?
actually more popular because people would actually read that.
I don't even know what that is.
There was even a joke in the book, not in the book. There was even a joke in the movie Major League, where Tom Berenger, who plays the catcher with the blown knees, he has a
Mhm.
comic book of Moby-Dick that he's taking on the away games, and then
Really? Oh my
yeah,
God, I don't
like
remember that.
yeah,
I
there's
haven't
a
seen that
comic,
movie in a million years.
and maybe the Black Freighter was based off of it from
The Black Freighter being based on Moby-Dick does totally track.
I don't know. I'm spitballing. I'm thinking out loud, which is not a good idea, but
Or like being like a Melville influence. Like I that makes sense for anyone who doesn't know Black Freighter. That is the very popular comic book inside of Watchmen and inside of the Watchmen world, right? That's what you're talking about. And
yeah.
and so in the Watchmen world of like these vigilantes, there is like a very popular thing which is boating and pirate stories. Pirate stories are very, very, very popular. And I wonder if that isn't like related to Melville in the sense of like, things could have gone a different way. Like
Mhm.
America doesn't grab onto Moby Dick as like the future of writing, the way that Melville is hyping Hawthorne as being like the Shakespeare of our time. Hawthorne does have an influence on the next generations. Melville does not. And I
Mhm.
don't think. I mean, you could refute this by knowing more than I do for sure. But in some ways, like because of his the general disinterest of the public and a few scholars and critics really liking him, but Moby Dick's not like influential for like many, many years after it's published.
Yeah, just influential if you're a professor of American literature, I guess.
But things could
Well,
have gone differently.
popular.
Yeah,
Because yeah,
things could have gone differently. Like
yeah,
that becomes the biggest book of our time, then the Black Freighter makes sense.
yeah. How do you guys have any opinions on Harold Bloom's opinions?
I like Harold Bloom, but I
Uh-huh.
don't know that aside from like having like when I was in college, I guess just out of like 26 years ago, I read some of his stuff, but since then I've not. But he was always like very friendly towards like my sort of books and our sort of books. So
Sure.
I'm sort of
Well,
like personally okay with it.
what I'm bringing it up for is because when I started like understanding this huge Shakespeare influence, and there's looking for it now, there's like so many Shakespeare references in this section. It's
They're
ridiculous.
everywhere, yeah.
Yeah. Um, when I made the Shakespeare connection, I thought like, oh, I wonder what Harold Bloom thinks of Melville then, or Moby Dick in particular, with Shakespeare being so important to Moby Dick. He calls it a masterpiece. I watched a 45-minute interview with him where I just listened to a 45-minute interview of him, and I swear half of it was just this noise. This poor guy is making like this wet smacking sound as he talks. It's
It's
unbearable.
Alex Jones.
Yeah.
That sounds Chad's
But he
Chad's a
says he doesn't
fan.
consider it a novel. He says that Moby Dick is not a novel. It is like an epic prose poem.
I get that.
Very much in the style of Shakespeare. So I was like, oh, okay, interesting.
That's really wild because I mean it is. In some ways it's interesting that you say that too because this section I read on the plane, which I was texting you both and was like, I don't man, reading on a plane is weird. I don't know where I'm at here. But what it was striking me as is more of a prose poem. This section that we read for today. Like it's a lot of like little sequences and like sort of vibes and less of like here's a plot. Whereas I think with Harold Bloom's just reading into this, like the idea of a novel does, if you date it back to like the Fielding sort of like what is a novel supposed to accomplish, is like an adventure plotted event. And like Moby Dick has a plot, catch the whale, right? Like get to the whale. But like that's not really a plot. Like it doesn't have any, the plot part is so irrelevant, like in terms of like all of the sections that are about like the anatomy of the whale and like the uses of the whale and like the Wikipedia aspect of
The
it.
whiteness of the whale.
Is the
Which
whale white? Like
and in
right.
this one it talks about too like ice. I'd like to
Ice.
talk about ice like that. And exhaustively tell you about the blueness of the ice versus
Yeah.
the yeah, I thought that was interesting that Rodrigo put that in here as well.
It's interesting, like ice, we talked about it a few times, but ice is a metaphor I still don't have a great handle on. Like I can't get past thinking of it as like Ice Nine from like Cat's Cradle in some ways. Like it's the end of the world. Like ice is the end of the world. Uh, but like I don't. know that I understand exactly how the ice metaphor is working here per se. Do you
I
read on that, Kaya?
I don't know. I don't know that it I don't know that it helps within the terms of metaphor, but like we started watching 100 Years of Solitude on Netflix while we were in Latvia, and there's this scene where the Jose, is it Jose Arcadio, the main guy, where he takes his kids to go see ice, and so that was playing in my mind. But um, I mean, in terms of metaphor, but on 193,
Yeah.
there's this line and right in the middle where he says, "And then I discovered, still unpublished, the limitations of every author. Though at the time I enjoyed the excitement of being pure promise and blah, blah, blah. But the parenthetical is how to describe ice to someone who has never known winter." And that as just like an umbrella metaphor is, I just think it's nice. I think it's simple and you can make it complicated. Um, I don't know. Yeah.
That's a lot of cultural appropriation right there. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah. I
As
don't
if
know. I don't
as
know.
if
I'm not
as
high
if
enough for that conversation.
as if Spain hasn't done enough, you know.
Yeah. Like I don't know if that answers your question, Chad, but I saw that alone, like how to describe ice to someone who has never known winter as sort of a metaphor in and of itself of like even just listening to you right now of like how do you talk about the ice in the book? Um
Ice is
mm,
fucking interesting. Now that I think
Ice
about it,
is really interesting.
the True Detective season, the most recent one, is set in
Hmm.
Alaska, I guess, or mythologically
Hmm.
Alaska. And it's so interesting because it is all ice too. Like
Yeah.
everything is like ice is weird.
Hmm.
But yeah, I don't know where we're going with that aside from like asking about the ice. But the influence I was asking about with like Melville not being a huge influence, but Melville too, or Hawthorne being one, was more related to like Rodrigo, Fresán's influences, American literary influences. Like Melville is definitely one. Hawthorne doesn't feel like as much of one, and then the other people seem to be more in the Melville vein. The Nabokov, which I'm counting as American at this point in time, the Thomas Pynchon stuff that always seems to like quasi be referenced in here without really being referenced in here. Like he's on that side. And it's not like the two are necessarily opposed, but in my mind they kind of are. Like Hawthorne is very like realistic, dark, describing the inner sense of humanity, of being whatever. And Melville is a little bit more postmodern and sporadic and like not as plotted. Like House of Seven Gables is so tight compared to like Confidence Man, which is very loose and very like I mean it is very tight in some ways, but also like as a from a reader's perspective, like there's no summary, there's no plot that concludes, there's no like answer to the question. There's no resolution. It's not a novel in that way. It is more like a prose poem.
What I found interesting, like I have to think back a long ways, unfortunately, for this, but I recall when I was taking some of my American literature surveys, like the class had no problem discussion. People would talk, like uh, it was really easy to read Scarlet Letter, no problem. The short stories, no problem. When we had to read Moby-Dick, everybody was just like silence, and the professor had to just do all the heavy lifting. Nobody knew what to do with it. And it was just like, oh God, I got to slog through this. Like everybody hated it. I don't know. I geeked out because I was like, oh, cool. I was never going to read this book, but I'm going to read it now. Like, and like really devoured it. But I thought it was really interesting. Like Hawthorne's very teachable, very approachable. And like students get it and like it like a lot. Um,
That's interesting.
Hmm.
Melville, not so much.
Is it like themes and characters are easier than style?
I don't know. It's like I don't know. It's like when people want to read like Heart of Darkness or something. It's like, do you want to explore? Hey, you want to explore like the horrific depths of humankind? Come on.
Or
Let's go.
do you want to read
But don't
about
we
a
want that?
priest who had a baby out of wedlock?
But we like that. Like we like the salacious. We like the true crime. We like the
Okay.
horror. We don't like the metaphor. Metaphors are hard.
Yeah.
How do you explain Melville to someone who's never read Melville?
Who's never read a metaphor?
Yeah, how do you explain Melville to someone who's never read a stylistically intricate book?
How about this then? I just noticed because I was on 193 reading along with Kaija. If we just go back to 192, so if we think about this idea of like what we consume, what's popular, what's not popular, um, and the parenthetical at the bottom here, and oh, it's far better to sleep beside a sober cannibal than a drunk Catholic.
Oh yeah. I made a joke. I thought of a joke, yeah, related to that because like I wouldn't sleep next to a drunk Catholic. As a drunk Catholic, you probably shouldn't sleep next to me. But yeah, that is very interesting too.
And then
Others,
later he has cannibals asking about ice and everything. But yeah, just like yeah, I like this idea of kind of I'm not afraid to look on the other side of what's with our human existence and our humanity, how we treat each other, what monsters are under there. Like that's that's cool stuff. I mean, yeah, like sex and cheating and murdering people, that's pretty cool too. But it's far less terrifying. Like the terrifying thing is the person when in the dark of night and the person that can't see well saying, "Come with me, let me turn the light off for you. Come with me." Like that's terrifying.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I don't know if we want to even summarize this section of the book, but more or less he's I like my feeling, I don't know if you guys have a different thing, was that it was kind of like a tone poem. Like you go through different parts of life, he's sort of jumping around a little bit, telling his story of like how he writes these books, Moby-Dick being strange, but also like I can see everything everywhere at various points in time. And
yeah.
his sons die, and he reflects on like that's the flip side of having your parent die is having your sons die before you die. And like
Mm,
that's also like disturbing, but it has these little like moments and they're very quotable and it's very well written and very done. But in terms of like summarizing it as a plot moving forward, I don't have a lot to say about it. It was really like sitting with the this interpretation, this representation of Melville himself, and like with like the little twist of being kind of unmoored in time a little bit.
for sure. I enjoy it because I enjoyed this section because it is a break. It is a little respite. It feels lighter than the previous sections. And I don't mean tonally, just like um there are whole passages, and I'm looking now, one of the ones that I marked, oh, on 204, where we're just getting like a list of all of these superstitions
Mm.
for I think it's just for sailors, but like, you know, you always take care of the cat because they hunt rodents, and you honor cormorants, and you never sail on a Friday, and you always sail on a Sunday, and you don't think too much about Jesus on the other days, like the tattoo animals on your, I love this like superstition dump. And this I like little details like that. And so I feel like in a book like this and with a writer like Rodrigo, I do appreciate these moments of um I think it kind of steps away from the referential and having to know about Hawthorne. Like I had to look it up earlier this morning, Chad mentioned just like reminded about the Hawthorne thing, and my literal response was, I don't know that I've read any Hawthorne. And then I had to look it up. I'm like, oh yeah, I have read Scarlet Letter, but I don't think about it.
Yeah.
Um, so I think it is nice to get kind of a break, which negates, it sounds like I'm negating it, but it's nice to get a little break from the other parts. And you also get to see the other ways in which Rodrigo can write and can present this information. I think it's wildly enjoyable. And one of the things that surprised me the most is that like we read this book, we worked on this book, we went over, Chad edited with Will and like, I proofed it and laid it out, and we're looking at this book for so long. I don't remember a fucking thing when I start reading one section to the next. Like it reads new to me, and I love that because it's enjoyable.
Oh, I was gonna say it's that forgettable.
Yeah, it's so forgettable. Why are we here? Um,
See, like right
like
in the middle, like that's like a poem.
yeah, yeah. The
Well,
forgettability.
in the sense that like every time you start it, it's like kind of feels like a new thing. Like I don't
Yeah.
really like the way that memory is built for me anyways is like based on, even though I hate plot, based on plot. Like I remember those, if I remember anything, I'll remember those things. And when sections aren't like that, I don't really like, I remember the vibe, but not the specifics. I'm really bad at remembering lines from books.
I've got a great quote, I think that does something interesting where it shows what a great writer Rodrigo is, and also kind of like stitches together all the strange things we've been discussing in with this section. So, and we talked about way back earlier, the start of section 3. I have no house, only a shadow. But wherever you are in need of a shadow, my shadow is yours. Or, but whenever you are in need of a shadow, my shadow is yours from under the volcano. And then we talked about obviously like Hawthorne, we talked about Shakespeare and yada, yada, yada. Page 212, um, right about in the middle, when he's talking about Pierre and how he's going to end his book, Pierre. A malicious wink on my part, I suppose, at Nat H's unconfessable obsessions that I can nevertheless detect. Writers are specialists in perceiving everyone else's dark spaces to detract from our own shadows, in
Mm.
violent deaths and creative suicides, as if it were forced and submitted to an imperious need to empty the stage like a parody of Shakespeare and to frighten readers. So, Shadows, Hawthorne, Shakespeare, and the dark, scary other side of humanity, like all in one little quote right there.
Yeah.
That is amazing. I forgot to tell you guys, and I'll include this here, is that when I said I had a couple things about the Hawthorne Melville relationship, the one that I didn't mention that we alluded to earlier in the podcast, like some episodes ago, maybe on the first one about Melville, but I didn't have the details all right. So there was a story that Melville hears about this shipwreck and this woman and this guy. He hears from like this woman's dad, I believe, who's a lawyer, and her name is Agatha. And he tells it to Hawthorne in a letter and sends him a letter and is like, you should write the story of this woman. This is perfect for you. Agatha, here's the whole story, blah, 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 blah. Goes through and writes the whole thing to him. It's like a very long letter, very long explanation. I did not reread it, so I don't want to summarize it. Then he writes in October 25th, 1852. So this is pretty far along their friendship towards the end. And he's like, I heard that you're not writing this story, that you're having problems with it, and you're not going to do it. And like, it's another one of these situations where it feels like Melville's like, hey, man, there's this great story. You should do this. You should do this. And Hawthorne's like, bro, I'm good. I'm not going to write your fucking story. So Melville then maybe wrote a version of this story or novel. And that's referred to early in the book, where he's like, the book that I never published, or maybe I did write it, or Nat wrote it. I don't remember. There was like this Agatha story does and does not exist in both ways. There's like a fragment of it, I believe, that's been published. There's like versions that are like unfinished and it exists. And then there is, for anyone who's like a super fan, there is a Spanish version of it that was written by Sarah Mesa and another author who I can find. Um, each wrote their version of what the story would have been that exists for people who read Spanish and are Sarah Mesa fans to tell that. But this is another one of those instances where Melville is like, they're close and they're trying to, and it's interesting to think about them both writing the same story, but writing it very, very differently. But Hawthorne being like, no, I'm good. And Melville being like, okay, so you're not going to do my story? Like, I have a lot of ideas for it. Like, this is how it should work. This is what the author should be. This is how, like, the dad should be this, blah, blah. He's got all these tips in there. And, like, is yet, like, Hawthorne's like, no, I'll pass, which I think talks to that earlier experience. And sorry to throw this in at the end of the podcast, but I forgot about it until right now.
I mean, that sounds like then that Melville was basically like, well, if I write it, no one's gonna care, but if you write it,
So yeah,
people.
so the line is this is from a November 25th letter. The other day in Concord, you expressed uncertainty concerning your undertaking the story of Agatha, and in the end, you urged me to write it. I have decided to do so, and shall begin immediately upon reaching home. So it is like passed back to him. So Kai, you have to go. You dive out. We'll talk to you later.
Yep, I've for those watching or listening, but I and who care? I have left my line of the week with Chad and Brian, so
You got it. I've got it.
thank you guys. Also, really quick before I run out, I do want to point out that on 214, there is a reference specifically to the Confidence Man, and at least Rodrigo's narrator believes that it is a single person, a single stranger coming on board, changing multiple masks. So
I agree. It's better if it's one person.
I think it's better as a metaphor.
I
Okay.
think it's ice. It's ice.
I would rather live in the limbo in the bardo than try
So
and than try and make one person.
I thought that was interesting also. All right. See you guys. Thank you.
Uh, that's so funny. So you're the one. We should have like teams. One
Yeah,
person versus non.
I read it as one person changing appearances and yeah.
I,
But
and I read it as just like a true metaphor, like not tied to like a reality of a person.
mhm.
Because I just don't think that like the time or the space works out.
Yeah.
But who knows? Who cares? I'm super in the minority on this, I think, too.
Yeah. That's okay. All right. Well, what's your line of the week for this
Okay.
section?
It's okay. Uh, the one that do you want to read Kai's one while I search?
I don't have Kaya's.
Oh, she sent it just to me. Her one is from page, not sure, but it is the last line. Oh, page 212. I hate thinking about myself like this, which I do. I marked that too, and I thought that was a great one as well. The Frankenstein aspect that pops up in this over and over again too, in contrast to like Dracula, which shows up
Uh-huh.
obviously. The Frankenstein thing is kind of interesting because it is like Moby-Dick and like various of these books are like Frankenstein books. They're just like pieces wedded together, less
Mhm.
than like the Hawthorne whole, I suppose. What's your favorite line?
Not my favorite line. Just before I read it, I will share though that for any Fresán enthusiasts, there's a nice little Easter egg on 189. Like a clock that went ahead and now is trying to find the correct time, or better, a wind-up toy, not broken but malfunctioning. So,
Yep.
oh God, the wind-up toy's in this too. It's the greater Rodrigo literary universe
Absolutely.
all colliding.
Very true.
That one.
Is that
Um,
your line, or that's just
oh, it
throwing?
was just an observation that I
Oh,
thought
I found mine.
might be of
So
interest.
mine is on 231. Suddenly, everyone is a writer, everyone is a rewriter.
I like that.
I feel like there's a point where he says something like writing a book that's for like to create the reader. I'm not finding this right now, but it's like basically like you can't. It's not that Moby Dick was written to be Moby Dick, but Moby Dick was written to be read by people who would read Moby Dick.
My line comes on page 243, and it's just a snippet of a longer line. But right in the middle, it says, literature doesn't matter either.
I have that marked. An
Yeah,
entire
that whole
1,000%.
I did as well in the margin. That whole paragraph's great. But
And
in
once you reach
particular,
that point, you discover that nothing matters anymore. And joy, literature doesn't matter either. But this
but
is another
you know
instance
what?
of like,
we've discussed some interesting things. We've learned a little bit. We've smiled, and there's a great proverb that says, "Time spent smiling is time spent in the company of the gods." So there's that line as well.
Very, very true. Always fun. Always fun to do this. I don't have anything else to add to this section, I don't think.
No, I'm
I
excited
like
for the
it.
home stretch. I think we go to the inn for next time, right?
Yep, next week is the last week. We will finish the book, and I mean that's it. I don't know what we're doing next after this. We don't have any plans. We'll have to figure it
Okay.
out. So we maybe we'll have an announcement. Maybe we'll announce what's next, what's coming next. But
Ooh.
other than that, we'll finish next week. You can always find us on Blue Sky and Instagram and on YouTube. If you're watching, smash the like button. Be sure and follow the right uh, podcast feed. If you're following it on Apple or on Spotify, be sure and click through. I've got both the links at the top of this. The other one is no longer in service after next week. And also, I couldn't update because of Latvia blocking my VPN, which is interesting. I feel like I was being watched by the Russians. I'm not sure how I got through security, to be honest, to get back into this country, but I couldn't upload it. So like you could only if you're listening to this on Apple or Spotify, you're on the right feed. Stay with that one because the other one, not only is it going away, but I can't update it at the moment because I was blocked. So the do that. Otherwise, tell your friends, blah, blah, blah. If you're interested, I have one last plug. If you're interested in things Delkey Archive, I wrote a 5-part series for Substack that covered just an initial overview and then one book from every single year of Delkey's history. So 40 books are covered. It's pretty insane.
Super fun. I like that.
Broke my brain.
Yeah.
But yeah, check it out. Enjoy it. I'll link to the first one on here and you can find it on Substack and so on and so forth. But otherwise, have a good week. Glad everyone's into the new year. Got any final joke there, Brian?
No, I think I'm gonna soak up some more Moby-Dick now. Might as well.
Take it down to the ground, take it down to the ground, take it down to the ground with me. Don't you think you're high enough? Don't you think you're high enough? Don't you think you're high enough for the fall? We are going far away, we are going far away, we are going far away from Utah. Don't you look down, don't you look down, don't you look down, don't you look down. You are high above ground. We are driving with our friends. We are driving to